I watched my billionaire boyfriend's mother dial 911 on our wedding day, screaming that I was a gold digger who didn't belong. But when the officers arrived and saw me in my wedding dress, they immediately stood at attention, saluted, and said, "Ma'am." Her face went completely white. If you've ever been judged by someone's family or felt like you didn't belong, this story will give you chills. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell because you won't believe how this wedding day drama unfolds. Trust me, the ending will leave you speechless. Hi, I'm Marilyn, and I never thought my wedding day would include police sirens, family drama, and a revelation that would change everything forever. But let me start from the beginning, because this story is about so much more than just a wedding. 6 months ago, I was living my simple life as a kindergarten teacher in a small town outside Chicago. Every morning, I'd wake up in my tiny apartment, make coffee in my secondhand coffee maker, and head to work where I spent my days teaching 5-year-olds how to tie their shoes and spell their names. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and I loved every minute of it. That Tuesday morning changed everything. I was running late, as usual, and rushed into my favorite coffee shop downtown. I was fumbling with my purse, trying to find exact change, when this guy behind me just stepped forward and paid for my order, not in a show-off way, just quietly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I turned around to thank him, and there was Cameron. Tall, kind eyes, wearing a simple gray sweater that looked expensive but not flashy. He had this gentle smile that made me forget I was supposed to be rushing to work. We ended up talking for 20 minutes about everything and nothing. He asked about my job, seemed genuinely interested when I told him about my students, and when he laughed at my story about little Joey who insisted that dinosaurs were just really big chickens, I knew I wanted to see him again. What I didn't know was that Cameron Martinez was worth over $3 billion. He was the founder of a tech company that had revolutionized online security systems. While I was teaching kids their ABCs, he was running board meetings and making decisions that affected thousands of employees worldwide. But in that coffee shop, he was just Cameron, a guy who paid for my latte and made me laugh. We started dating, and for months, he kept his real life hidden. He'd pick me up in different cars, always nice but never the kind that screamed money. We'd go to normal restaurants, catch movies at the local theater, take walks in the park. He seemed to love my simple world as much as I was falling in love with him. When I invited him to my apartment for dinner, he raved about my spaghetti and meatballs like it was a 5-star meal. The proposal came on a quiet Sunday morning. We were sitting on my tiny balcony, sharing coffee and reading the newspaper, when he got down on one knee with a simple but beautiful ring. Nothing flashy, nothing over the top, just perfect for us. "Marilyn," he said, his voice shaking a little, "you've shown me what real happiness looks like. Will you marry me?" I said yes before he even finished the question. That's when everything changed. That's when I met his family. The Martinez estate was like something out of a movie. As we drove through the gates, my stomach dropped. This wasn't just wealth. This was generational, old money, change your life forever wealth. The house sprawled across acres of perfectly manicured land, with fountains, gardens, and more windows than I could count. Cameron squeezed my hand as we walked up to the front door. "Just be yourself," he whispered. "They're going to love you." But the moment Shelly Martinez opened that door, I knew that wasn't going to be true. She was stunning in that polished, untouchable way that money can buy. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her cream-colored dress probably cost more than I made in 3 months, and when she looked at me, her smile never reached her eyes. "So you must be Marilyn," she said, extending a hand that felt cold even though the evening was warm. "Cameron has told us so much about you." The way she said it made it clear that whatever Cameron had shared, it hadn't impressed her. Dinner was a carefully orchestrated performance. The dining room could have seated 20 people comfortably, with crystal glasses and china plates that looked like they belonged in a museum. Shelley peppered me with questions that sounded polite but felt like tiny cuts. "A kindergarten teacher? How sweet. Tell me, dear, what are your long-term career goals? Do you have any experience with international travel?" Cameron spends quite a bit of time overseas for business. Have you given any thought to prenuptial agreements? I'm sure you understand, with Cameron's position. Each question was delivered with that same cold smile, and each time Cameron tried to redirect the conversation, she'd wave him off with a perfectly manicured hand. By the time dessert arrived, I felt about 2 inches tall. But the worst part wasn't the questions. It was the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention, like I was something distasteful that had wandered into her perfect world, something that needed to be disposed of quickly and quietly. After that dinner, Shelley made it her mission to make my life difficult. Wedding planning became a battlefield where every decision was questioned, every choice criticized. She'd call vendors behind my back, suggesting upgrades that would change everything Cameron and I had chosen together. "Darling, surely you don't want your guests eating from paper plates," she'd say when I suggested simple, elegant table settings. "What will people think? This dress is lovely, but perhaps something more appropriate for the Martinez family name?" She even hired a private investigator. I found out later that she'd been having me followed, my background checked, my finances scrutinized. She was looking for something, anything, that would prove I was the gold digger she was convinced I had to be. The thing was, Shelley wasn't entirely wrong about me having secrets. I did have something I was hiding from Cameron, from everyone, but it wasn't what she thought. For 3 months, I'd been disappearing at odd hours, taking mysterious phone calls that I'd answer in another room, receiving mail that I'd quickly hide away. Sometimes I'd have to cancel dates last minute, claiming family emergencies or sudden illnesses that I never quite explained. I could see the confusion in Cameron's eyes, the hurt when I'd suddenly become unavailable, but I couldn't explain. Not yet. The timing wasn't right, and there were other people's safety involved, protocols that had to be followed. 2 weeks before the wedding, Shelley decided she'd had enough. I was in my apartment, trying on my wedding dress one final time, when I heard pounding on my door. I opened it to find Shelley standing in my hallway, her face flushed with anger, holding a manila folder like a weapon. "I knew it," she spat, pushing past me into my living room. "I knew you were lying about everything." She threw the folder on my coffee table, photos and documents spilling out. Pictures of me entering and leaving buildings I'd hoped no one would notice. Phone records showing calls to numbers that couldn't be traced to anything in my simple teacher life. "I don't know what your game is," Shelley continued, her voice getting louder with each word. "But I won't let you destroy my son. Whatever you're involved in, whoever you really are, it ends now. Call off this wedding, disappear from our lives, and maybe I won't have to expose you for the fraud you obviously are." I stood there in my wedding dress, looking at this woman who had convinced herself that I was the villain in her son's story, and I felt something break inside me. Not my resolve, not my love for Cameron, but my patience with being judged by someone who knew nothing about who I really was or what I'd sacrificed. "You don't know anything about me," I said quietly. "I know enough," she shot back. "I know you're lying to my son. I know you're hiding things that could destroy him, and I know that over my dead body will you marry into this family." She left that day with a promise that she'd stop the wedding, whatever it took. Wedding morning arrived gray and drizzly, which felt appropriate given everything that had happened. I woke up early in the bridal suite of the small hotel where we'd decided to get ready. My maid of honor, my sister Jenny, was already up, fussing with flower arrangements that kept getting delivered to the wrong room. "The caterer called," Jenny said, her voice tight with stress. "Apparently someone called yesterday and tried to cancel the entire order." My heart sank. "Let me guess. A woman who claimed to be the mother of the bride?" "How did you know?" I didn't answer, just started getting ready with a heavy heart. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and instead, I was spending it doing damage control from a future mother-in-law who was determined to destroy everything. The phone calls kept coming throughout the morning. The photographer had been told the wedding was moved to a different location. The musicians received a message that the ceremony was canceled altogether. One by one, Jenny and I had to call everyone back, confirm that yes, the wedding was still happening, and no, we had no idea why someone was trying to sabotage it. By the time I was putting on my dress, my hands were shaking. Not from nerves about marrying Cameron, but from the stress of wondering what else Shelley might have planned. My dress was simple but beautiful, ivory silk with delicate beading along the bodice. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I tried to focus on why I was there. I loved Cameron. He loved me. Whatever happened today, that was what mattered. The venue was a small garden pavilion about 20 minutes outside the city. Nothing fancy, nothing that would impress the society pages, but it was perfect for us. As Jenny drove me there, I could see guests starting to arrive, Cameron's family and friends mixing with my much smaller group of teachers, neighbors, and childhood friends. But as we pulled up to the venue, I could also see that something was wrong. Shelley was standing near the entrance, talking animatedly to two uniformed police officers. Her hands were gesturing wildly, and even from a distance I could see the satisfied expression on her face. "What is she doing?" Jenny whispered. I felt my stomach drop as the pieces clicked into place. This was Shelley's final move, her last desperate attempt to stop a wedding she couldn't control. As I got out of the car, I could hear bits of her conversation with the officers. "She's been lying to my son for months," Shelley was saying, her voice carrying across the parking area. "We have evidence that she's involved in something illegal, something dangerous. You need to stop this wedding before she ruins his life." The younger of the two officers, a man who looked to be in his 30s, was nodding politely but didn't seem entirely convinced. The older officer, a woman with graying hair and kind eyes, was listening but watching me as I approached. Cameron came rushing over from where he'd been greeting guests, his face a mixture of confusion and anger. "Mom, what are you doing?" he demanded. "Why are there police officers here?" "I'm protecting you," Shelley said, her voice taking on that reasonable tone she used when she wanted to sound like the rational adult in the room. "This woman has been lying to you, Cameron. She's not who she says she is, and I have proof." The guests were starting to notice the commotion. I could see people whispering, phones coming out to record whatever was about to happen. This was turning into exactly the kind of scene that Shelley probably hoped would humiliate me enough to make me run away. But I didn't run. Instead, I walked directly toward the officers, my wedding dress trailing behind me, my head held high despite the fact that my heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. "Officers," I said calmly, "I'm Marilyn Chen, the bride. I understand there's been some kind of complaint?" The moment I spoke, something changed in both officers' expressions. The older woman officer's eyes widened slightly, and she straightened up in a way that seemed automatic, instinctive. "Ma'am?" she said, and there was something different in her voice now, something that made Shelley's confident expression start to falter. "Could you state your full name for us?" "Marilyn Elizabeth Chen." The two officers exchanged a look that I recognized, a look I'd seen 1,000 times in a dozen different countries. The younger officer's entire posture changed, and when he looked at me again, it was with an expression that made Shelley take a step backward. "Major Chen?" the female officer asked, her voice now carrying a tone of respect that seemed to confuse everyone present. I nodded once, simply, and then both officers did something that made Shelley's face go completely white. They saluted. Not a casual gesture, not a polite nod, but a full, proper military salute that spoke of recognition, respect, and understanding of exactly who they were looking at. "Ma'am," the older officer said formally, "we apologize for any disruption to your ceremony. We were responding to a complaint, but clearly there's been a misunderstanding." The silence that followed was deafening. Every guest, every vendor, every person within hearing distance was staring at the scene unfolding before them. Shelley looked like she'd been slapped, her mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. Cameron was staring at me like he'd never seen me before, which, in a way, he hadn't. "I don't understand," he said quietly. "Marilyn, what's going on?" The female officer looked at me with a question in her eyes, asking permission without words. I nodded slightly, giving her the go-ahead to explain what Shelley's private investigator had been too incompetent to discover. "Your fiancé is Major Marilyn Chen, United States Army," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent gathering. She's a decorated combat veteran who recently returned from a classified mission overseas. The suspicious behavior that was reported to us was actually Major Chen completing mandatory debriefing sessions and medical evaluations required after extended deployment. She turned to look directly at Shelley, whose face had gone from white to red to white again. "Ma'am, filing a false police report is a serious offense, but more than that, you've just tried to have one of our nation's heroes arrested on her wedding day because you didn't like her choice of career or her family's income level." The younger officer stepped forward, his voice respectful but firm. "Major Chen served 3 tours of duty, ma'am. She's been awarded the Bronze Star, the Combat Action Badge, and the Meritorious Service Medal. While you were worried about table settings and prenuptial agreements, she was putting her life on the line for people like you." I could see Cameron's face change as the pieces fell into place. All those mysterious phone calls, the appointments I couldn't explain, the times I'd had to cancel our dates. The reason I'd been so secretive wasn't because I was hiding something shameful, but because I'd been protecting classified information and following protocols that existed to keep people safe. "The reason Major Chen couldn't discuss her recent activities," the female officer continued, "is because she was part of a joint task force that rescued 14 American civilians who had been taken hostage overseas. The operation is still classified, which is why she couldn't share details even with family members." Shelley was now staring at me like I was a complete stranger, which I suppose, to her, I was. I don't understand," she stammered. "You're a teacher. You teach kindergarten." "I am a teacher," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "I've been teaching for 3 years, ever since I left active duty. But before that, I spent 8 years serving my country." I looked around at the gathered crowd, at Cameron's family and friends who had been so ready to judge me based on my simple apartment and my second-hand car. "I didn't tell you about my service because I wanted you to know me as I am now, not as what I used to do. I wanted Cameron to fall in love with Marilyn the teacher, not Major Chen the soldier. I wanted to be loved for who I am when I'm reading stories to 5-year-olds and helping them learn to write their names, not for what I did in combat zones halfway around the world." Cameron stepped forward, his eyes bright with tears and something that looked like awe. "All those times you disappeared," he said softly. "All those phone calls you couldn't explain." "Medical checkups," I confirmed. "Psychological evaluations, debriefing sessions about things I still can't talk about. The Army doesn't just let you walk away after the kind of mission I was involved in. There are protocols, follow-ups, requirements that don't stop just because you want to plan a wedding." The older officer smiled at me with genuine warmth. "Major, we'd be honored to provide an honor guard for your ceremony if you'd like." Before I could answer, something unexpected happened. Cameron's uncle, a quiet man I'd barely spoken to during family gatherings, stepped forward from the crowd. "You served in the 82nd Airborne," he said, not asking but stating a fact. I nodded, surprised. "So did I," he said, his voice thick with emotion. 30 years ago, but once airborne, always airborne." He looked directly at his sister-in-law, his voice stern in a way I'd never heard before. "Shelley, this woman has done more for our country in one deployment than most people do in their entire lives. You should be ashamed of yourself." And then something beautiful happened. One by one, people in the crowd began to step forward. Cameron's business partner, who I'd met only briefly at an engagement party, revealed that his son was currently deployed overseas. My principal from school, who had come despite barely knowing Cameron, shared that her father had been a veteran of Vietnam. Even some of Shelley's own friends, society women who I'd assumed would judge me the same way she had, began to look at her with disapproval rather than support. "This is ridiculous," Shelley said, but her voice had lost all its earlier confidence. "I was protecting my son. How was I supposed to know?" "You could have asked," Cameron said, his voice quiet but firm. "You could have trusted me to know what I was doing. You could have given the woman I love the benefit of the doubt instead of hiring investigators and trying to destroy our wedding day." The female officer looked at me again. "Ma'am, would you like us to stay for the ceremony? We'd be happy to provide that honor guard." I looked around at the faces surrounding me, some curious, some ashamed, some filled with newfound respect, but the only face that mattered was Cameron's, and in his eyes I saw love that had only grown stronger with understanding. "I would be honored," I said. What happened next was like something out of a movie. The officers radioed for additional units, not for law enforcement, but for ceremonial purposes. Within 30 minutes, 6 uniformed officers had arrived to serve as an honor guard for a kindergarten teacher who had also been a major in the United States Army. As I walked down the aisle, with officers standing at attention on either side, I caught sight of Shelley sitting in the front row. Her face was streaked with tears, and when our eyes met, she mouthed 2 words: "I'm sorry." The ceremony itself was beautiful, made even more meaningful by the presence of people who understood service and sacrifice. When Cameron and I exchanged vows, we weren't just promising to love each other through good times and bad, but acknowledging that we'd both learned something important about trust, truth, and the difference between who someone appears to be and who they really are. In my vows, I promised Cameron that there would be no more secrets between us, that the woman he'd fallen in love with in that coffee shop was exactly who I was, just with a few more stories than he'd realized. In his vows, he promised that he would never again let anyone else's expectations or judgments come between us, and that he was proud to marry someone who had served her country with such distinction. After the ceremony, during the reception, Shelley approached me. She looked older somehow, less polished and perfect than she had that morning. "Marilyn," she said, her voice shaky, "I owe you an apology that's bigger than anything I know how to give." "You were protecting your son," I said simply. "I understand that." "No," she shook her head firmly. "I wasn't protecting Cameron. I was protecting my own idea of what his life should look like. I was so focused on what I thought you weren't, I never bothered to find out who you really were." She paused, looking out at the reception where her son was dancing with his new wife, surrounded by friends, family, and uniformed officers who had stayed to celebrate with us. "I've spent my whole life around people who measure worth by bank accounts and social connections," she continued. "I forgot that there are other ways to measure a person's value, more important ways." She looked back at me, and for the first time I saw genuine respect in her eyes. "Thank you for your service, Major Chen. And thank you for making my son happier than I've ever seen him." 6 months later, Cameron and I were having dinner at our new house, a comfortable place that was bigger than my old apartment, but not nearly as intimidating as the Martinez estate. Shelley had become a regular visitor, and to both our surprise, we'd developed a relationship built on mutual respect rather than tolerance. She'd started volunteering at the VA hospital, working with veterans who were transitioning back to civilian life. She told me once that she'd never realized how many heroes were walking around in regular clothes, doing regular jobs, carrying extraordinary stories that they rarely shared. "I learned something from you," she said during one of our dinners together. "I learned that the most impressive people are often the ones who don't feel the need to impress anyone." As for me, I was back to teaching kindergarten, but with a new appreciation for the different kinds of courage it takes to serve others. Whether it's in combat zones or classrooms, the heart of service is the same: putting other people's needs before your own and finding purpose in making the world a little bit better. Cameron still brags about me to anyone who will listen, but not because I'm a decorated veteran. He brags because I helped little Sophie learn to read, because I stayed late to comfort Marcus after his parents' divorce, because I've found a way to make every child in my class feel special and valued. The truth is, we're all more complex than we appear on the surface. We all have stories that might surprise the people who think they know us, and sometimes it takes a dramatic moment, police sirens, and a woman in a wedding dress getting saluted to remind everyone that judging others based on appearances is not just wrong, it's dangerous. My wedding day taught everyone present, including me, that love requires trust, respect requires understanding, and the most beautiful ceremonies happen when people choose to see each other clearly, completely, and without the filters of their own expectations. And sometimes, just sometimes, the quiet heroes are the ones standing right in front of you, wearing simple clothes and living simple lives, carrying extraordinary stories in their ordinary hearts. What an incredible twist. Sometimes the people we judge the most harshly are the ones who've sacrificed everything for our freedom. If this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe for more amazing true stories that will restore your faith in humanity. What would you have done in Marilyn's situation? Let me know in the comments below.